All right. Well, it is 6 p.m. and this is our February 3rd. This is our first inaugural Steve and Troy show. And that's in Steve and Troy because it's alphabetical, not because Steve's better than me or anything. I just want to make that clear. It's
I
alphabetical.
have a better
Um,
agent.
but basically, for those of you that don't know, this is a show that is made possible by IEPPV, the Inland Empire Professional Photographers and Videographers, and the Professional Photographers of Orange County. So we're doing this together. So it's going to be a regular monthly, the first Wednesday of the month. We're going to have different guests.
Oh,
If you're
and
not
we've got
familiar with
phenomenal
everything,
guests lined up, by the way.
right. So make sure that you go to IEPPV.com and go to the calendar and check out who we have coming up because we've got some really amazing guests. And of course, we started with our favorite human, Don Komarechka, who is going to talk to us about the insanity, self-torture of macro. No, we're going to talk about a lot of different things.
Roy, I've been losing my sanity one snowflake at a time.
What we're going to be doing, though, is at the beginning of each one of these segments, is that we want to kind of talk about a local topic, like a local photographer related issue that often we talk about behind the scenes and we talk about in the green room. So today, one of the things that we're going to talk about is copyright. But before we do that,
Watermarks. Watermarks.
watermarks. Yes, I said copyright. But
Yeah, you did.
before we do that, most of you know who I am. But if you don't, my name is Troy Miller. I'm a full time working wedding photographer when weddings were safe to do, and I'm part of the board at IEPPV. And I've been an educator for a long time, and so it's fun to be able to do this. I've gone through lots of competitions, image critiques, earned my PPA masters for all of you that know what that is. And my co-host and permanent guest on the show is Steve Brazill. Steve, please tell us a little bit about you and your qualifications and why you're here.
Hold on. I got to make it look right.
There you go. There you go.
There we go.
So much
So,
better.
my name is Troy, and I'm a wedding photographer. And I've been doing wedding photography since pretty much before I was born. I started wedding photography as a small child. No. Yeah. So my name is Steve Brazill. I'm a photographer. I'm a live music photographer. For those of you that are not from IEPPV, I have been involved with IEPPV for a number of years. I was on the board for a number of years. And I am a podcaster. And what I photograph is live music. And my podcast is Behind the Shot. And I'm looking forward. We've got some great guests lined up for this series, seriously. Starting with my buddy Don, who does podcasting with me. We're doing a show, in fact, tomorrow live. But we've got some other really great guests lined up as well.
Right, right. And any links that we have, we'll be put in the show notes too. So us just blurting out links right now aren't going to help you. And then Don, I can't say enough good things about you, but I'll let you speak for yourself because you know all the right words.
I guess I have to go through this methodology here, and I have to wear a hat.
That's it.
Dang it.
That's it.
So, yeah. So my name is Don Komarechka, and I'm, I guess, a mad scientist of photography in certain ways. At least other people call me that. I am an inquisitive soul, I guess, and I love to look at the world in a way that I can't see with my own eyes. The way that nobody's taking me seriously wearing this. So I'm going to take this off. So. But I love to explore the unseen world. You know, infrared photography, I can't see that with my own eyes. You know, astrophotography, I cannot see the world, the universe at large as I, you know, with my own eyes as I can with a camera. There's so many things that I can explore fundamentally differently with a camera, and I love that. That means photography becomes a tool to greater exploration and appreciation of the world around us, and that's kind of the mantra that I live by as a professional, and that's gotten me on tons of documentary films and you know, written books, and another book is coming out, and it's sharing it it's not just seeing it, but being able to share it, I think, is one of the biggest things that makes me passionate about my photography and my career.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. Steve, what's our topic? What are we going to talk about tonight?
So what we're going to do each show, Troy and I sat down and kind of discussed, let's do something different. Instead of just presentation, let's kind of get a little bit of conversation on a small topic that might be helpful to photographers. We've got a couple of them lined up for the shows as we're going, throughout the year. And today we're going to start it off with what is arguably a simple one from an opinion point of view, but it's also controversial. People have different opinions on this. And it's going to be watermarking, the pros, the cons, what we personally do, what some industry standards are, how it might help you with copyright and or not, and the pitfalls that you might run into when you're doing watermarking. So that's where we're going to start, because I think it's just something everybody debates and talks about. So Troy, you want to, Don, you already said it. It was pre-roll though, so that may get trimmed. So do you want to get us started on what do you do for watermarks, and what's your thought process on best practice?
You want to have a watermark. I think that, if I'm doing a presentation, I don't think I'm going to put a watermark on every image in a presentation or something like that. And whenever I make a print, I physically sign it. I've got a print studio behind me in my office here, so that makes it easier for me to do that. But when I'm throwing stuff on the web, I typically like to put a small, unobtrusive, and I have to frame that word beautifully with sparklers and make attention to that it being unobtrusive, which is an ironic statement. But you have to make sure that watermark, as paramount to the success of putting a watermark on an image, is not interfering with the enjoyment of the work itself. And if you do that, then you accomplish two goals. Number one, your image is not compromised by having it on there. And number two, if anybody wants to track you down, they know roughly how to find you, that the image is owned by somebody, that there's a copyright associated with it. But on the backside of it, there's a third element that if you've put a copyright notice, which is a watermark that's in the US considered copyright management information, if that gets removed or tampered with in any way, you have more remedies under the Copyright Act in order to pursue higher damages if somebody decided to take your work and misuse it. So I do a tiny little watermark in the lower right-hand corner of the frame, and I usually use blending modes in Photoshop, a lighten or an overlay blending mode, or sometimes some custom colors based on what it is for the image, just to make it there, but blending in with the image in a sense that it doesn't draw my attention to it. That's my mantra. That's my ethos.
Right.
Troy, you want to go next?
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I only put my name on there so that people can find me. I tend to think it depends on your industry though, too, right? So like if you're shooting, say, sports, and you're shooting a whole lot of sports and you're selling photographs for, say, $5 or $7 for a small photo, people have a tendency to want to steal those. My clients are spending several $100s for an 8x10, so they're less likely to take a low quality image off the web and duplicate it, right? Like they want high quality. So my name is just really on there, just like what Don said, very small, so that they know if they see an image, hey, that's Imagery Concepts. That's cool. Like, okay, I'm gonna get a hold of those guys, and we've gotten work because of that. Even the watermarks that we put on our images that we hang in facilities, I put it's the tiniest watermark. Like you have to walk up to the photo to read my name on a 20x30. I don't want to have my banner on there. Of course, I'm also the guy who buys a new truck. I take it home and I debadge it. I take all the Dodge stickers off because
I thought I was the only one.
They're not paying me to advertise for them. I love my truck, but so I'm a big fan for that. I also think that if you're going to put big watermarks across your image and you're going to block somebody's face or something like that, you're really kind of like graffitiing your own work. Maybe that's a little harsh of a term, but I don't want to do that. So that's what I do. So I'm very much in line with where Don's at.
So I'm pretty much in line with where Don's at as well, and I look at it from really 3 points of view. One, the aesthetic of it. Two, the legality or benefits therein of doing a watermark. And number 3 is the branding. And so obviously for branding, if you can put your brand on your photo and it's going up on social media, that doesn't hurt. If somebody does take it and shares it, and it may be, in my case with music photography, it may just be a fan that I don't care. I don't consider that theft necessarily. They're just sharing a shot of a show they were at. At least my name's on it and I get the branding. So that side I think is a plus. When it comes to the legality, it's everything Don said. The U.S. is the same, and that is if somebody removes your copyright management information from a shot, that it doesn't in and of itself guarantee you more repercussions or collections based on a copyright suit, but it does help to show intent if you were to have to go to trial or anything like that.
Actually, Steve, it does give you more. And
well,
I'm not a lawyer, but I've had a lot of letters from U.S. lawyers go out, and they stipulate that based on a removal or transgression against that copyright management information, that there is a dollar figure that is set by case law.
Interesting. Okay.
That can be associated, even if, and this is really important, you haven't registered the copyright to the image.
Well, and speaking of registration, that's another thing that's key. Troy and I have had this discussion at length, and that's the biggest way for you to maximize your remedy should somebody infringe your shot is simply by having it registered with the U.S. Copyright Office, which is fairly simple. I've got a video on my entire process.
I followed that video, Steve, and I registered all of my images in January of 2020 for every previous year. And,
awesome.
And so, yeah, it was slightly different because it was registering stuff after the fact versus stuff that hadn't been published, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
But it's almost exactly the same process.
And I mentioned that in there, but here, the last one is the aesthetics. And you mentioned size. So I vary the size based on the picture. If I'm going to put a watermark on a picture, which I always do if they go online, I position my watermark in a space that is conducive to that shot. I don't always go bottom right, although I usually aim bottom right, but sometimes there's a busy drum set there and it doesn't necessarily work. So I'll find a spot that kind of, to me, graphic design wise fits within the shot, and it's generally small or it's very transparent, like maybe a 60% overlay. And for example, Don and I do, for my podcast, we do a critique show once a month. And one of the shots I picked, because we're doing it live tomorrow, one of the shots I picked for tomorrow has a giant watermark on it. Part of the reason I picked that shot is so that we can.
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, part of the reason I picked it is so that we can mention to this particular artist that in this particular case, your shot is completely affecting the way that I view your photo, and that's what you don't want. It's, to me, the watermark is the photojournalist. It should be there, but it shouldn't become part of the story.
Right. And to all of the legal questions and challenges that we may have, Steve and I have secured Jack Reznicki and Ed Greenberg that wrote
Copyright
the
Zone
Copyright
guys.
Zone. Yeah, the Copyright Zone guys. And so that is going to be on April 7th. I know it's a few months away, but we're going to do nothing on that show except talk about this.
Right.
How
And I've had
important
them on
watermarks are.
Behind the shot twice. And then the video I did on my walkthrough, Jack Reznicki teaches. He's a professor at a arts college in New York City. He uses that video in his business class. So they're going to be a blast to talk to. They're hilarious.
Yeah.
So watch for that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to be good. So you know, they're going to give us the legalese of what all this means. So whether you're for watermarks or you're not, or you use them and you're not sure why you should, all we did is we just sort of wet your whistle for that up and coming show. See how we did that? That was planned. So that puts us right on time, Don. It's your show, and so just for those of you that know that are sitting in there waiting, we got a bunch of you guys, participants hanging out. The goal is that when we wrap this up at the end, if our guest Don still has time and he's still awake and he wants to hang out with us for a few minutes, we're gonna open it up for just a general meeting. And you guys can all turn your microphones on.
Ask
and,
questions.
You can talk to, or you can just yell at us, whatever you want to do, like whatever, whatever. I do have the kick out button. Like if you're mean to me and my friends, you guys go. But anyway, enough of me, and certainly enough of Steve. Don, you can go ahead and share your screen.
But yeah, before you do, I just want to say for Don, as kind of a more detailed introduction, for those of you that don't know Don's podcasts, he does a couple of them, but the one that's regularly released is Photo Geek Weekly. It is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to because it mixes two things I'm passionate about. It mixes photography, but then he goes to the weird geek side, and he usually picks anywhere from 3 to 5 stories a week, and has a guest on and talks about those stories. And sometimes it's really weird stories. Sometimes it's things like photo competitions that are charging money and might be unethical, which he's going to discuss tomorrow. So
well, and you know this because you're going to be my host, my guest host on the episode tomorrow.
Photogeekweekly.com. And actually tomorrow we're live streaming at 3 o'clock to Don's YouTube channel.
That'll be fun. Well, Thank you, Steve. And I can do a screen share here now to a topic that, I affectionately call sort of down the rabbit hole. An Alice in Wonderland reference there. But honestly, a lot of this stuff is so curious. And there's so much to explore. And to frame it properly, yes, I love the universe at large, right? Like I love sitting out. I got 3 cameras running here, plus my eyes. One to the left of me, one to the right of me, and one that's taking this picture. But to me, it was the experience of being there that was really valuable. But how many times do other people see the same thing? Oh, they probably, well, not many people would have seen that shooting star, mind you. But the idea for me is the universe at our feet is a unique experience to just about everybody that's viewing it. And yeah, I'm sure in California, you don't have a lot of snowflakes. So we're not going to dwell on that topic too much today. But just to show you a couple examples that I've had where I am here in Eastern time in Canada. Yeah, we get snow, and it's a beautiful subject to explore, but you've got other things that can be beautifully explored. This one snuck in with a watermark in the bottom corner. Could you imagine that? I might have switched that out just to show that as part of this experiment. But the idea of an image like this, it's documentary, and it's beautiful. I think, it's got a nice separation between foreground and background. Leafcutter bees are adorably cute bees because they don't have pollen sacs on their legs. They have a pollen brush on their abdomen, so they jump into a flower and they stick their butt in the air and they kick pollen with their back legs onto their butt. It's cute. I love it. But it's documentary to see this kind of thing, right? But for me, photography becomes more important when you take your own artistry and work with it into the subject. So here's a spider web. And this was near a waterfall, and I was out to photograph the waterfalls earlier in the day, before the sun was harsh. And I dropped everything and I looked at the spider web. But the spider web I saw wasn't this. The spider web I saw had no water on it. I had a spray bottle in my camera bag, and I sprayed the heck out of that spider web to create the image that you see here. And so you can create work. You don't just have to come across it. And especially when people are looking in a more natural element of photography, you might think, okay, well, I have to document what I see. I have to just do that, and I do it. I do it with my snowflake work. I do it with other areas. But sometimes, if you can be purely inventive with your work to create a subject that otherwise wouldn't exist, like this freezing soap bubble, and I could regale you with the stories of the two different lights and their angles and their color filters and everything. But the point of showing you this, knowing that you're a more warmer climate crew, you probably can't do this unless you have a very large chest freezer, um, that it's completely a created subject. It doesn't exist until I create it. And the same is true of something like this. We have a green immigrant leaf weevil, which they are pests in our garden. They're lovable pests, though. And while this bug has wings, he could fly away. He seems to be as enamored with this scenario as I am. But the behind the scenes setup to show you how this is actually created is so deceptively simple. It's almost like an aha moment that might be a slap in the face, because it's just this. It's a flower in front of a flower in a bucket of water, a bowl of water, square bowl, a vessel of water, um, with a flash, just a bare flash with a dumb trigger on the side, and that's it. And that can create, from the right angle and knowing how the light works with all these different things, can create this as a resulting image. The Gerbera daisy in the background is not in the frame, really, but it encompasses the entire frame being out of focus and becoming the background. And the surface tension of the water gives me colorful ripples and lines. And this becomes an image of uh, art and science at the same time, right? Understanding how the science equates to beautiful artwork, and weaving those two things together, I think, is paramount to the success of a lot of images. And to be on one side or the other is still completely acceptable. Don't get me wrong. But it brings me back to this idea of that we see the world the way that it's useful for us to see as human beings, that are the creatures that we are. But that's not necessarily the way the world is. The person next to you, another person on this call, is going to see the world differently than you. Your dog is going to see the world inherently differently than you do. That bee I showed earlier, a hummingbird, whatever else, there's so many different perspectives. The spider that made this web is probably quite distraught as to what I've done with it, covering it with water and putting an African daisy in the background. Looks kind of like a bunch of eyeballs. Not sure if I like this shot, but hey, it's indicative of the process. And that process is iterative. In this case, this was from last May. We had a freak snowstorm in May. Well, it's Canada after all. But these grape hyacinths were sticking out of the snow, and I was thinking, oh, there's an opportunity here. So I took out the camera, and this was the first shot that I took. And I thought, it's passable. It's not good, probably not great. But what can you do to push this forward? How can you evolve this image? Well, the lighting is really flat. Well, maybe I could add some lighting. The background is all the same. Maybe I could change the background. And so you do. Um, and so I light it with a flashlight, just a simple LED flashlight. It's a beefy one, I guess. It's got 1,000 or 1,800 lumens or something like that to it. It's not at its full intensity, but it's giving me some depth to the structure and the snow around that little flower. And in the background, that's a garbage can. That's all that is. So the first shot out of camera looks like this. And all of a sudden, you can see it starting to improve when I'm starting to manipulate and control the elements at play here. The lighting, again, it's just with a flashlight. In the background, now I've got this darkness. But what if I adjust the angle such that the flower is above that pseudo horizon line in the background? And it's that iterative process, and you can slowly improve an image from one shot to the next as you just continue to explore it. And this is, I think, the best that I got that day before my daughter pulled me away to build a snowman. But there's a time and a place for everything. So that was as far as that got. But it's not the first time I used that technique. This snowdrop, one of my wife's favorite flowers, taken I think 2 or 3 years beforehand, was this. And same garbage can, slightly different flashlight, but it was the same idea that I thought, oh, okay, I know how these puzzle pieces can fit together. I've done something similar before. And so we have some fun to play into that. But I go to extremes with my work. I've got I got all the bells and whistles for macro photography. You know, this is one configuration of extremeness that I might use for snowflakes, but I have a lot of macro lenses. And actually, it's funny because there's 2 or 3 more that if I were to retake this photograph would be hiding in the background that have been taken since I took this shot. What can you do with this gear? It's not the gear that does it. It's the ingenuity, it's the creativity, it's understanding how it lets you explore things differently. And in some cases, this is grains of pollen in the center of a flower. And every flower, by the way, has a different size and shape and color to their pollen. And we have a rose of Sharon flower in our front yard. And I decided this year, well, 2020, but during the pandemic era, to photograph that rose of Sharon pollen, partly because it's normally completely innocent, but with the imagery we get slapped with all the time, it looks quite dangerous. Because it looks kind of like a coronavirus, but well, that same structure exists on multiple scales in biology, and this is just a grain of pollen, albeit incredibly tiny. This is a taken with a 50 times microscope objective. How about something like this here, 20 times objective, and next to it, that's actually a space rock. That's a tiny grain of sand sized micrometeorite. And I've played around with all of these different things. Like you've got this grain of sand from a beach in Oregon, I think, that is technically a garnet, a faceted garnet. And on top of it is a micrometeorite, something from outer space. So this is a nice sort of heaven and earth type of concept. The closer you get to stuff, the more interesting it can become. And this is another micrometeorite. And I don't expect anybody to go out and run out and buy Michitoyo Plan APO 50 times microscope objectives and all the bells and whistles to make this work. This is just to say, the closer you get, the more there is to see. And the more challenging it becomes to see too, because there's a single frame right out of camera of some pollen on a flower petal. You don't have more than a sliver of a fraction of a millimeter of focus in this particular image. So, well, physics works against you. The closer you get to a subject, the shallower it becomes. And there are ways to overcome that. You know, I've become I don't know if anybody's called me a master in it, so maybe I'm a self-proclaimed master in focus stacking. This is 997 shots combined of the small portion of a wing of a Madagascan sunset butterfly. And a single frame from that same sequence would look like this, which I kind of like too, actually. It's got a nice abstract feel to it, but the depth is definitely not there. The closer you get, the more abstract things can become. You know, this is the little frilly bits from the center of a pansy flower. You know, they've got these petals and they've got these little globule nodule things in the center. I don't know what they're technically called. I haven't gone that far, but I did take pictures of them and they look kind of like insect eggs. And so the closer you get, the more interesting things can become. What would look like originally, I don't know, ice cubes that Steve has in his drink would be, there you go, Steve. Would be grains of salt. Please don't add salt to your whiskey because on different scales, things can look in different shapes. And yeah, Steven says, yeah, that's sodium chloride plus some other, I'm sure, impurities within there. But that crystal structure, that makes cubic
What
crystals. That's
what
what you get.
magnification is that?
That was done with the MPE 65 millimeter macro lens. I
Canon.
can't
Okay.
recall if I used uh, uh, extension tubes on that lens. So this is at least 5:1 magnification, might be 6:1. So that's pretty high magnification. That would be 5 or 6 times the magnification you would get from a regular macro lens, and likely cropped in somewhat to that level as well. Um, Same exact scenario for something like this, where this is the eye of a deer fly, a near cousin to a horsefly, and they got really crazy patterns in their eyes, but they also are predators and they prey on creatures bigger than themselves. And so I was walking in a nature preserve, and I felt something on the back of my neck, and you do the instinctual like swat, and then I pull my hand back and I look at my hand, and I'm like, okay, well, I've got a very cooperative subject right now. Yeah, he's not going anywhere. He was killed in this process, but he picked the fight, and that was well before photography was any element of my thought process. So there you go. I won that battle, and that is my trophy. But there's so many different things about photography that are curious, right? And this was a curious moment for me. Um, I wasn't curious about the subject. No, I was curious about the background. And you'll notice that there's hexagons in the background. Out of focus water droplets have turned into six-sided polygons. And why the heck was that happening? Well, it turns out I was using that Canon MPE 65 millimeter macro lens that has a six-bladed aperture, which then translates into hexagonal shapes of out of focus specular highlights, which led me down a rabbit hole. I've got these little light points on just a fiber optic lamp. They're in focus. If I throw them out of focus, then it reveals the geometry of the aperture if it's stopped down at all. And this was a 7-bladed aperture, so that makes it's not septagons. I think it's heptagons. Heptagons is a 7-sided polygon, and so we have that. But if I were to make that aperture completely wide open, then you have just circular shapes, because there's no aperture blades in play to create geometry. But that actually leapt on to a different concept of using lenses that were inherently flawed, old triplet lenses that would create interesting out of focus details in the images. The bokeh, however you want to pronounce it, in the background of this image, that's a mineral sample. I think it's a piece of quartz crystal that is sprayed with titanium oxide to give it a rainbow color in the background through optical interference. But the science aside, I've got some slightly goldish colory blobs of geometry, whether they be circles or something else in the background, in these floating flowers in the foreground. And I've played with that idea quite a bit. And that previous image in this one was taken with a vintage lens, or a modern version of it, called a Trioplan 100. And there is a company that still makes this lens. The Meyer Optik is, what are they now, owned by OPC Precision Optics, a German company, after a big fiasco. I'm not going to go down that path to figure out where they went bankrupt and so on. But you can still get these modern versions of triplet lenses. But that got me thinking, okay, they're expensive. They're like $1,000 for one of those, for a trick old idea. So I took that quartz crystal, and I just shot an abstract image of it here. And that's with the Trioplan 100. But I found a cheaper option that created this as a resulting image, and it's actually a little sharper, to be honest with you. And I kind of found it a little bit more interesting, just as this is as an abstract piece of artwork. And I did some other examples, just some testing of these different pieces. And so this one was with the TrioPlan 100. It had a bit of a rainbow effect on the outer edge of the out of focus areas there, and I thought that was curious. Where the cheaper option was much more concise around those same regions, and that cheaper option, I gotta say, is a heck of a lot cheaper. And this is really where that science and art kind of connects together, because that cheaper option is a Soviet era projector lens, a Zetar 100. You do not need this lens. Any Soviet era projector triplet lens, for which you can get for $15 on eBay, you'll probably pay more for shipping, will yield you identical or nearly identical results. And I've bought a bunch of them. They all perform almost exactly the same, because it's not this fancy brand name of this TrioPlan 100. It's the fact that it's a cheap triplet that gives it that effect when things go out of focus. And so if you play to the aesthetics of that, you understand that it can create something interesting as you go. And I just love that curious, um, bit of hidden knowledge. And I want to call it hidden because everybody is so stuck on brands and specific models. But no, it's the fundamentals of what it is, and why it is, rather than the brand that's stuck on the front of it. And so keep that in mind when you're looking to play around with this type of stuff. Now, um, as I don't want to say like as a child, but when I was younger, as I think I'm younger than most people on the call. Um, but I remember seeing some interesting images of computer processor. Uh, uh, just there were rainbow colors all over that. So you know what I did during the pandemic is I bought a bunch of cheap processors off of eBay for single digit dollar values, and I took the bottom off of them, and I've been making a series of work about the silicon die inside of a lot of these computer processors. This is a Pentium 60 megahertz that had a bug, the FDiv bug, if anybody's familiar with that from back in the day. And I want to reshoot this actually, and shoot this with an actual bug. I don't know, like an aphid or a beetle or something small, on the processor itself to make it a computer bug, and just have some fun with that. But it's so much. There's so much to explore. That is the cache controller from that same processor. This is a 486 I don't know. It's just a new fun series that I might be going down and experimenting with, where you've never really seen them from this angle with this level of detail before. All inspired by a photo that I saw of this Pentium Pro back in the mid to late 90s. And I tracked down a Pentium Pro and I popped the bottom off of that, and I got this image of it. Now I had to add color to it because there was some kind of coating on top of it that was preventing the same diffraction grading color effect that you were seeing on the previous images. And I sent this through some internet sleuthing. I found the original designer of the chip. And Bob Caldwell designed the P6 architecture, and got in touch with that man and shared a couple of emails back and forth. And he also designed the Pentium 4, the NetBurst architecture. And I tracked down one of those chips as well. I think Bob Caldwell has the idea to possibly use one of these images on a custom guitar he is making right now. So you never know where your random rabbit hole adventures are going to end up, but there's so many of those things to explore and to have a lot of fun with. And Steven says, yeah, that floating point error was notorious, although it was really kind of blown out of proportion as soon as it was discovered and it could be recreated. And Troy, I hope that you can just take a heat gun and a screwdriver to some of those processors and just just break off anything that is like original Pentium Pro and earlier. They have a little sort of a metal piece on the bottom that if you melt the solder around that, you can just pop it off and easily get access to it. For something like this Pentium 4, that had to be dissolved in boiling acid, nitric acid in this case. So that's not exactly healthy. You don't really want to have that indoors in your house anyway. But there are other types of acid that can work really quite nicely for photographic purposes. In this case, this is citric acid. You can buy it at health food stores. I don't know if it's a supplement or a food preservative or what, but I bought it because it can make pretty pictures. And in this case, we've got another. This is actually, I think it's from the same microscope slide, and this is something that you can do right at home, really easily, really freely to make, as Steven says, used as a flavoring. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I'm sure you could get interesting results with just lemon juice too, which would have a lot of the similar components. I'm going to show you an intimidating setup, and I'm going to slowly build it down to something that you can do with your phone. So this is the intimidating setup because I like to crank it to 11 sometimes when it comes to building stuff up. And I say that by just grabbing stuff around me. This is a poor man's polarizing microscope. And so you've got a light source on the bottom, and you've got a polarizing filter that is, obviously it's going to be polarizing that light. Then I've got a microscope slide. You could use a sheet of glass from any picture frame you have handy, 4x6 frame that's on the wall or collecting dust in a closet. Just take the glass out. All you need is glass. And then I put a polarizing filter on top of that. And I've got a 10 times microscope objective on top of that. I don't need 10 times. If I was using a smaller camera, like I've got a micro 4/3 camera here, I can do 5 times on that and get pretty well the same results in terms of magnification. But it's a simple process of cross polarizing the light. So a flashlight underneath, polarized, your object in between, and in this case, I don't want to go into the whole physics of bending and twisting of light and the directions that happens through this whole process, but this birefringent process that we see here is going to make beautiful colors on the other end, and it just starts as simple as mixing citric acid with water. And putting it on a slide piece of glass. And I can do that with a little pipette, an eyedropper, or just kind of sloshing it on there. It doesn't really matter how you do it. But it's important to note how simple things can be. Like your smartphone, right? I mean, your phone, you're looking at this right now on a computer screen. Any display is likely polarized. So I can just take my phone and I can just bring up something white and put the slide on top. And so the screen itself is a polarized light source. And if you have a polarizing filter, then you can put that on top in opposition to the polarization of the screen, and you'll get to see these results. This is MSM. I forget the actual full name for MSM. It's a complex thing. It's a health food supplement. Maybe it makes food taste better. No, that's something else. But there's reasons why you can just buy all of these random chemical components. And my accountants think I'm nuts when they say, okay, well, Don, how is that possibly a business expense? But in the case of this one here, this is menthol. I bought a bag of menthol crystals. Menthol melts at something like at about plus 40 degrees Celsius, around that. So it's very easy to just put that on like your stove element for a half a minute or so, and have the menthol crystals completely melt, and then take it off, and then wait, I don't know, 10 minutes, and they make these beautiful fern-like structures that don't smell it. You'll feel like you just ingested way too much Vicks Vapor Rub in the process, because that's what menthol does. But it was beautiful. And what was this one? This was an amino acid, I think. This was beta alanine. Again, something that I think you're supposed to take before you do a workout to improve results. I don't know. I'm a thin person, but I'm not a fit person. That's not what I would ever use this for. I just make it look like some weird topographical map of the ocean floor on a microscope slide in my studio because that's beautiful abstract artwork. That's the fun of it. And there's just one more for good measure. This goes back full circle. This is also citric acid, which is still one of my favorites. And I bought a bag of that stuff on Amazon, and it'll last me forever for these types of things. And I'll set out like, I don't know, a dozen microscope slides at night, and come back in the morning and see what they've done, right? And especially during the pandemic time, that was rather therapeutic because that allowed me a reason to get out of bed some days where that reason otherwise wouldn't have been there. So anyhow, that's sort of a discovery methodology. That's the mad scientist of it, but you can really build yourself into the artistry of a lot of this stuff as well. And this brings us into the freezing soap bubble era of imagery. This is simple physics as well. In fact, it's simpler, far simpler. These are just water droplets. The more spherical they are, the better they'll act like a lens. And in behind is a Gerbera daisy, however you want to say that, on a blade of bluegrass, some type of bluegrass. I can't remember what this one was, but bluegrasses will often have a powder-like coating that makes them hydrophobic. It means the water doesn't want to absorb into them. It just kind of beads up on the outer surface. And that gives you spherical water droplets. And magic ensues. As soon as you understand the simple rules of how that stuff kind of comes together, you can start to play in this realm. Here's a really simple approach. This is a lens from 1976, the Canon Macrophoto 20mm f3.5 lens that requires to be attached to a bellows system. And there's a flower in the background. You can't see really in here. There's a clamp that has a dandelion seed right in there. And there's a flash off on the side that's hitting the flower. And there's a piece of cardboard held in a clamp, a third hand tool or helping hand tool, they're also called, that's blocking the light from hitting the seed, just the background it's hitting. And so that ends up creating this as a resulting image. And I think that's pretty cool. Stephen says, yeah, you can make something hydrophobic by coating it with saline. Or silane, I guess. I don't know what silane is, but I do know what Rain-X is, the brand name of the stuff that I can put on my car windshield that makes the water droplets beat up and roll off. And I've applied that to plates of glass and stuff before, that creates something similar. It might even be this liquid form of silicon that you're mentioning, Stephen. So that's, I can't apply that to a dandelion seed, though. I mean, I don't think that's going to be an applicable subject matter. So, choose your battles therein. But, here's another one with a more modern lens that, it's a little bit crisper, but the depth of field is still so very shallow. These are either sprayed with a dollar store spray bottle, or this one I think I put in front of the opening of an ultrasonic humidifier and just let it sit there for about 10 minutes. This one was a slightly different approach, a little tendril from a cucumber vine. And the one water droplet you see there, and that's very clearly defined, and the water inside of the curly area, they were placed specifically with a hypodermic needle. And that needle, the tip of the needle, the metal is also hydrophobic. The water wants to get away from it very, very quickly. And so that makes it very easy to place water droplets specifically where you want them to be, because they're so easily detached from the source that this image is just cropped, I think, slightly, maybe a couple of levels of adjustments in Lightroom or something similar, but it's pretty well out of camera to create an image with these 5 water droplets. Yeah, some fall out of focus. Your depth of field is going to be super shallow. That's fine. I mean, the image survives that, I think, but you can take it further. You can always take photography further. This is a blade of bluegrass, specifically blue fescue. I know because I planted some in my garden to use for this type of thing. And it's held under the surface of the water with a little clamp. And there you can see the little clamp with an osteospermum flower in the background. Anything daisy-like that's symmetrically, radially symmetrical rather, would work really well for this type of stuff. And it took me probably 3 or 4 hours to build this setup. I didn't know what I was going to create. It's easy to know in retrospect what you're creating. And Steve, you were kind of doing like a Picard style facepalm moment. You got the hair for it anyhow. To realize that it doesn't just come to this. This is a lot of experimentation before you even pick up the camera, or maybe you pick up the camera intermittently to figure out what might work and what doesn't before you actually go back to the drawing board. And you just got to do these experiments. Or you also have to break the mold. In this case, these particular water droplets, I actually didn't like when I was editing the image because I was shooting it in this orientation. And horizontally like this, this lupin flower leaf has these little frilly bits that kind of mimic a wildflower to create these droplets. But to me, this felt like an alligator jaw that had flower teeth in it. And that just didn't really connect to me in any meaningful way. But when I rotated it 90 degrees, it was like this kind of droplet elevator. And that worked. I liked it. And so, yes, you're not beholden to gravity in that kind of thing. In this case, it was a prairie smoke wildflower seed, I think. Clematis behaves quite similar as well. And part of the setup for this was, if I didn't outline with a little line in magenta and a little magenta rectangle there what the subject was, this prairie smoke wildflower seed, you would think that the action was all about the flower in the background. And I've got a platypod max with these gooseneck arms and some little lightric torches. I've got lots of LED flashlights. They're always around on my desk in various forms. I've got that. I've got a lightric torch over here too. I think Platypod, I don't know if they still have it as a bundle. They did for the longest time, where you could get that whole kit all as one thing. So you might want to check that out if it's still there. I find it quite valuable for this kind of shooting.
They definitely do. They have the bundle still.
They still have the bundle, Steve. Thank you for that.
Yeah, they do the bundle with the goose. They have goosenecks. They sell Lytra, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I've loved that kit with this kind of imagery because it's just kind of turnkey, right? Like you don't have to start. I like being inventive. This whole scene is inventive, but if there's some things you don't have to reinvent, I consider that valuable, and so that's what you have. But it's also it's not that you just set it up, you shoot it, and you give yourself a pat on the back, and you're done. There's 4 different attempts that you're seeing here. There might have been 20 or 30. Some of them were so awful that I just didn't even care to share or even to shoot. These ones were close to the mark, but the one that I shared previously was a little closer to what I wanted. And this brings us down to an interesting phenomenon with macro photography specifically, and it has to do with depth of field. And, if I was to be shooting a landscape image at f8, I'm going to have most of it in focus, unless I've got something in the extreme foreground that's going to be a bit soft and it's not going to, compute for me. But I can barely get a single echinacea flower here in focus. But if I get even closer to that flower, and this is key, at almost the same camera settings, f9 now, but I have even less in focus. And so if I have this water drop, but I've got the refraction of it sharp, the outer edge is soft. If I make the outer edge sharp by shifting my focus around, well, the refraction is soft, and never the two shall meet in order to create this image that you're seeing here, which is created by focus stacking, which you combine multiple images at different focus points together to create something useful in terms of extending that depth of field. And that brings me to sort of the propeller hat moment of the conversation. I should put that propeller hat back on, but I won't. I'll just describe it where if you have, and I did a video with DPReview TV very recently that describes this concept of diffraction. And I encourage you to check that video out. It's 7 minutes, well worth your time to just kind of geek out about what light does when it passes through an opening. If you have a wider opening, and no matter how wide your aperture is, you'll always get diffraction. It just won't really matter in most cases. But if you have smaller apertures, especially macro photography has smaller apertures than you might even expect, then this type of thing changes. This is a wide aperture, so you got a little bit of bendy light along the outer edges. And so the bendy light on the outer edges is going to go a little bit off course, but the majority of light is going to pass through normally. If you have a smaller aperture, then all of the light gets bendy to varying degrees, mind you, and that's going to start to send things off course. And as Stephen says, yeah, interference patterns, kind of. It's easier to depict that with this laser passing through a pinhole. And so you've got, Stephen probably knows the exact name of the dot in the center and the pattern that results from that. But the idea here is that light that should be hitting that central pixel, I put a grid here to kind of depict a pixel, it's spilling off into all the neighboring pixels. And so too are other pixels on the neighboring sides here. And it's called an airy disk in the middle. It's called an airy pattern around it based on the name of the guy that came up with the whole concept. Well, he didn't come up with it. That's physics. He discovered it. Got to use my right words. And if I go into a snowflake image at extreme magnification, you see that little red square? If I zoom in on that, then I get this. And you see this one main line coming on right here? Well, it has an echo right here. And it has a secondary echo right here and a tertiary echo right here, a little bit, very faint. That's spilling, I don't know how many pixels that is going off, maybe a dozen pixels away from the one that it should be hitting. And that's a problem, right? That I want my pixels to stay where they should be. But diffraction starts to interfere with that. And it's such that the Canon MPE 65mm lens has this chart in the manual for it. And if I was to be shooting at f/16, which in most cases for landscape photography is going to be just fine, but if I'm at 5:1 magnification, that actually becomes f/96. And effective aperture is related partly to the amount of light that you're collecting. I understand that. And not directly related to the diffraction abilities of that aperture, but they almost kind of run in tandem in a lot of different places, or at least enough that you can say, yeah, the closer you get, the higher magnification you have, you're going to want to avoid those tiny apertures. And that means that images like this, they're created taking many multiple images. This one was about 20 or so, combining them together to increase the depth of field across multiple frames, while each and every one of them being very shallow in focus, maintained that detail, that critical sharpness that the image wouldn't have been possible without. Now, there's a balancing act here, and something that we can play with modern equipment. And that modern equipment, I think, I mean, I say modern, it could be a camera from even 6 or 7 years ago, when pixel shift high resolution modes started to come onto the table. So here we have a simple setup. Again, I'll use anything at my disposal. I'll use a clothespin. I don't care. It doesn't have to be something I go and buy from a camera store. If I have it lying around somewhere, I will utilize it if it's going to work. And so that, with the flashlight on the flower in the background, this is a seed from a, it's called a yellow goat's beard wildflower. If you're in Europe, it's actually known as salsify, which is a root vegetable, and a delicious one at that. And you can actually buy salsify seeds in packets, and you can plant them and maybe have them go to seed eventually and get the big seed fluffy bits. But the image out of camera was this. Now, I shot this from a greater distance away than I had intended, knowing that I can crop in on the shot. The camera that I was using, the Lumix S1R, is a 47 megapixel camera. And even if I cropped in on that to my final image, I'd still have enough. But that camera happens to have a high resolution mode, which takes 8 separate shots in quick succession and combines them together to quadruple the resolution of my resulting image. And so 47 megapixels becomes like 100 and just shy of 190 I think 187 megapixels, which is ridiculous. I don't need that resolution for anything really, except that the majority of my professional career, I was shooting with between 18 and 21 megapixel cameras. They were very serviceable. There's nothing wrong with that. I've built my business around that. But what if I can throw pixels away? So long as I'm far enough away from the subject, my magnification factor isn't really there, diffraction isn't as big of a play, that I can kind of work that balance and say, okay, well, if I crop in on this, and this is a single frame that does not require focus stacking at all, then I get something that's very useful as a final image. I've thrown a lot away, but in this case, I can create that final piece pretty well in camera with just some basic cropping without needing to go through extensive post-processing work. And I've done that with this image here as well. These 2 dandelion seeds emerging from the surface of the water. They're held below the surface with one of those little helping hand tools, the little swivel alligator clips, and single shot, cropped in from that high resolution mode in order to create this image here. Part of the water droplets are created from a spray bottle. Again, just dollar store stuff. And the 2 bigger droplets, one on each seed, were placed with a hypodermic needle. And if you're curious where you get a hypodermic needle, Amazon. You buy bags of them for almost nothing. I'm sure that if you go into at least around here, if you go into a pharmacy and you ask for a clean needle, no questions asked, a pharmacist is just going to give you a clean needle. They might judge you, but no matter how many times you try to say it's for a photography project, they might not agree with you, but you'll still get a clean needle to play around with these subjects. So these concepts, these ideas, I do want to plug my book here, if I may quickly. I've got an upcoming book on macro photography that covers all of the stuff that we talked about, plus a lot more. Snowflake photography, freezing soap bubbles, ultraviolet fluorescence, which we're going to get into in the next little while, the water droplet refraction and everything else. You can get a copy of that at skycrystals.ca. That's a piggyback off of where my first book was, and I'm just using the same e-commerce structure I established there, because I don't have enough time to rebuild everything right now. I don't have enough time to finish the book. I'm nearly done. But there's only so much time in every day. And, people ask me, Annette, when will the book be out? When will it indeed? Well, I would ask that question to this wonderful little girl, my 4-year-old daughter, who is the monopoly of my time. And she is worth that monopoly right now. But her going through virtual kindergarten takes up so much of my free time, with my wife working as well. So I am trying to get this done at the best pace that I can, and I'm doing the post-processing section right now, and I was working on that earlier today. In the green room before we started, I was showing Steve and Troy some of the work that I was doing towards that end. So anyhow, that's a snowman that she made me build, by the way, after I was photographing those flowers early on. It wasn't a big snowman, but it was good enough for her. So let's switch gears a little bit, and go into an entirely different topic, something that is so accessible that nobody knows about. And in this area here, this is actually I was made fun of in a fun way. These are diamonds. These are tiny little rough diamonds, and they're impure. And because of that, they're super cheap. When I was sharing the resulting image from this setup, people were saying, Don, you must have come into some money. Diamonds are now your photographic subjects. Well, you could buy a little baggie of 200 or 300 rough diamonds like this from India or Pakistan for about $20 on eBay. It's not a difficult thing to get. But I make it look intimidating when I start to throw all of my flashlights and other things around it. And again, sort of like that microscope thing from earlier, this looks intimidating, but it's really not that. If I kind of draw attention to this tiny little row of, that's the diamonds right there. And I'm at about a 3-to-1 magnification here. All this is 1, 2, 3, 4 flashlights all pointing at the subject at the same time. And yeah, I got some other big lights on the sides. They actually weren't doing much of anything. It was more of an experiment. But I got some ultraviolet lights, and they don't have to be expensive. They can be super cheap. I ended up building some custom ultraviolet flashes, which were very expensive. The filters to put on those things were super expensive, to filter xenon light down to just emitting ultraviolet. But I found LED lights, flashlights that worked really, really well. The Convoy S2, which you see in the foreground, is what I was using in the previous shot. There's also a C8. It's a bigger flash head with a narrower beam, but they all do the kind of the same thing. So I use those ultraviolet lights to make these images, and they can be, I think, between $50 and $100 for those flashlights, depending if you need batteries and chargers. But spend an extra $5 on a pair of UV protective glasses, unless you wear prescription eyewear, which it's almost guaranteed these days that you would have UV protection on that as well. But what happens? Well, these diamonds, you can see some of them slightly a bit of a different color. But if I were to turn off the room lights, so it's, ambient light is pretty well non-existent, turn on those ultraviolet flashes and take the shot, well, that's what you get as a result. Now, I've cherry picked this, right? I've with the lights on, I aligned specifically a rainbow effect of these little diamonds, but because of the impurities within them, they would all fluoresce to a different color. And this is something that I discovered inadvertently when I was trying to photograph a friend of mine's engagement ring. He was going to propose, and I knew minerals fluoresced, and I shined the ultraviolet light on his engagement ring, and 2 of the diamonds fluoresced different colors. One was blue and one was orange. And I thought that was weird. It didn't make any sense at all. So I started digging into this, and I came up with the idea that, impurities. Do this at your own discretion, at your own warning, that if you take an ultraviolet flashlight to your significant other's very precious jewelry and find that those pristine, perfect diamonds that you were sold, you might have been sold a false bill of goods. I don't know what a jewelry store would say if you were to actually go in with an ultraviolet flashlight and say, no, I got to prove this. Turn off your room lights. I want to see what's up here. They might just not let you do that. But anyhow, it's a question. What are these reflecting on? That in this case, it's I think it's a neutral density filter, just a dark surface that's somewhat reflective. You could use a smartphone. Actually, just like that sort of black mirror surface. Anything would work to create the same effect. Although most smartphone screens also fluoresce a milky blue color. So neutral density filter would probably be the better bet. And yeah, they're doped with impurities. You know, they uranium glass is green, fluoresces vibrantly green. I don't know if that's what's making these diamonds fluoresce green in the center of the frame. The blue was by far the most common. The orange yellow ones were the secondary, and things got a bit more exotic after that. But I'm sure it varies based on location. It doesn't have to be diamonds. You know, there are stuff in your backyard that can fluoresce quite beautifully and vibrantly as well. Take a look at this flower. This is a South African succulent of some name. I don't think it has a common name, and I forget the Latin name for it. But if I turn off the room lights, which are on right now, if I turn them off and turn on the ultraviolet lights, I get this as a resulting image. And it's quite transformative as a subject goes. The throats of the flowers grow like glow, not grow, but they are growing a vibrant kind of green color. And that it's like a floral aurora. This is done in long wave ultraviolet. So some minerals will fluoresce in shortwave UV, but long wave, those flashlights that I'm using for a lot of the stuff, they peak at around 365 nanometer. And so filtered down to stop them from entering into the visible spectrum. And this is important. You can't just go to any hardware store and buy an ultraviolet light because they might be designed to see dog pee on carpets or scorpions in your garage or something like that. But they'll bleed a lot of visible light. So those Convoy S2 flashlights that I was using, they peak at 365 and they're filtered so that they don't cut into the visible spectrum at all. So the results that you have here are really quite remarkable, quite beautiful. I don't remember what kind of flower this was. It was a dainty little white flower from my backyard. Stephen says it does kind of look well. Fluorescein fluoresces more of a vibrant yellow green, like highlighter kind of color. But when you get the natural fluorescence with these kinds of things, this flower is one of the ugliest flowers you've ever seen if you saw it in a regular light. And in this case, can anybody guess what kind of flower this is? Maybe I'll give a minute for a guess on the type of flower at this. See if anybody can get it.
Anybody? I have no idea myself. Troy said cucumber.
Yeah, we got a couple of guesses here. I'm not going to say yay or nay until I see maybe a few more.
Skunkweed.
I'll give it the
We've
full
got
minute.
morning glory. I like this one. Weed of some plant.
Of some sort, yeah.
I'm sorry, of some sort, yeah.
This is not a weed. This is a deliberately planted thing, and you know what? I'll give it to Troy. Troy got it. It's not actually a cucumber. It's a squash. It's a zucchini, but they have very, very similar looking flowers, and they just turn into this yellow.
Can we just clarify really quick? Troy was not correct.
He was so close to being correct. He was in the right family of flowers. But this is a zucchini flower, and they're a ugly flower. They're just a dull yellow that they last for half the morning and then they shrivel up. They are delicious, by the way. You can eat zucchini flowers if anybody didn't know. But I often get asked when I show an image like this, well, is this what insects can see? Because a lot of people have an association that insects can see into the ultraviolet spectrum. But keep in mind, you're not seeing ultraviolet light here. You're shooting this image with your regular plain old camera. your standard ordinary lens, no special filters. Your camera gear is standard, nothing special or modified about it. You're just using an ultraviolet light source. So if you're curious about the physics, I'll give you the elevator pitch here. Ultraviolet light, which is fairly energized, hits the subject, and the atoms in that subject, they've got electrons. Those electrons get excited. They go into a higher orbit. They can only stay there for a very brief period of time. It's pretty well instantaneous. It's measured in femtoseconds. And then that decays back down to the original orbit. But in doing so, from that higher orbit to the lower orbit, it's giving off energy. That energy is given off as light at a weaker energy than was originally struck. And so that is fluorescence. So the ultraviolet light is invoking fluorescence into the visible spectrum. UV-IVF is what you would call that in this particular case. So ultraviolet light becomes visible light through that process. And so you're just capturing ordinary light, but through extraordinary means. And so in this case, this image is ultraviolet light directly recorded. This is what an insect could see. They would also see visible light too. And so I'm negating that from the equation. It's an entirely different thing that insects can see. But there are sometimes patterns in flowers that have evolved to showcase in ultraviolet light. On the left-hand side here, you have a marsh marigold. In the middle, plain old ordinary light, same marsh marigold. And in the on the right-hand side, that is the same flower, but in infrared light. And which one is the most interesting? I kind of say the one on the left in terms of the overall colors. But in this case, it is a Shasta daisy. Left side, what we see. Middle, I don't know, some Art Deco experiment, but that is the ultraviolet reflectance. It absorbs it all, or actually, it doesn't absorb it all, because if it absorbed it all, it wouldn't be able to fluoresce in any way. And so you've got the process on the right-hand side where it is fluorescing. And that is the easiest, and in this case, I think the most interesting way about it. But that just describes the difference between, in this case, the top image is ultraviolet fluorescence, the easy and magical thing to explore. Whereas on the bottom, left infrared, center visible, right is ultraviolet reflectance, the bullseye pattern that bugs can see, some hummingbirds too, I think. But that's about as far as it goes in terms of interest. So yeah, excited atoms. I'm one of them, or many trillions of them, as we are right now. But in this case, we have this is a bloodroot flower, if I remember correctly. By the way, there's no notes on my slides. This is just all me trying to memorize things. So if I mess things up, then there you have it. But it's a dainty white flower that fluoresces blue, but the pollen is a very bright yellow color, and the stalk and the leaf, or the multiple leaves, they stay a very dark burgundy brown kind of color. So there you go. This was fun. This is a hellebore, a Lenten rose or Christmas rose that we have this time of the year. They're going to the buds are going to be swelling even in the cold outside. And they fluoresce like crazy. Anything in the buttercup family tends to do that. So I bought this from the garden store, blooming, knowing that the pollen inside would be a beacon of light. And I thought, okay, well, this is the way this flower is bending. It kind of looks like, it kind of feels like it's a lamp, a lantern in some way. And so how do I accentuate that? Well, sure, I can make it glow, but I also turned on a fog machine and gave some atmosphere to the scene, so that the light coming off of the pollen in the center of the flower was actually hitting the particles in the air and spilling into the air itself, and not just staying still. And so that was a fun moment for me. And that's why I use this image as the title card for this presentation, because it really shows you how many different puzzle pieces go together, how many what if questions fit together to build into that that idea of mixing science with art together. And here's another fun example. This is a grapevine tendril that's wrapped around a mineral. The mineral is hackmanite, which fluoresces in this very vibrant orange color. Technically, it tenebresces, but only Stephen apparently would understand what the difference is in the chat. So, and I've got a subject, that same green immigrant leaf weevil, maybe not the exact same one, although they were taken in the same year from the earlier shot. And it's like he's got his hand, if you can call it that, on like the beating heart of nature, just by the way that things are shaped. And I love that. I mean, I love the idea, the concept, and so many of these ideas I have, they just completely fail. This one was a success because I was using those expensive flashes that I made, which I've rarely used since I discovered those flash lights. I would still need to use them for live moving insect subjects, yes, but in almost every other case, I've used those flashlights and they've worked wonders. So in a case like this, you see these flashes all around this garden variety sunflower. Pretend they're flashlights. For all intents and purposes of the final image, they don't have to be these expensive, modified, heavily gaffer taped flashes.
What did you gaffer tape on the front of these? It looks round.
Yeah, so I took the flashes apart to remove plastic filters that would otherwise focus or clarify the light, to remove ultraviolet light from the xenon output, because they're xenon flashes. And so on the front of them are two filters. One of them is a fairly standard filter. You can't buy it from a lot of stores in North America, but on eBay you can find a Hoya U340 filter. Or a knockoff therein of similar glass. And on top of that is Midwest Optical. I think they just call themselves Mid-Opt now. A Mid-Opt BP 365. Now that's going to cost you some change. That's the most expensive piece of the equation in order to build these things. It might cost me between $500 and $600 US, including the flash, to make one. And I mean, honestly, though, if you're buying a flagship flash from Canon or Nikon or whoever, you're going to pay about the same price. And to do this, you're exploring an entirely different area of photography. But notice the camera. It's that small little Lumix GX9 that I have right here. I've got, I think, the Leica 45 millimeter macro lens on there, which I love in terms of optics, but a simple camera. And the image straight out of camera with the room lights on, as you saw in that previous image, they look like this. It's not bad. And I chose this flower because it had some petals that weren't completely open. And so you had a break in the pattern as a result. But if I turn those room lights off and I let those flashes fire, or I just turned on those flash lights, if that's what I was using, then this would be the resulting image in separation from that. So it is transformative. Don't fall off your chair, Steve. But this is that hidden universe at our feet, right? Like it's around us everywhere. It's like it's a Disney scene. This should be an Avatar or something. It seems like something otherworldly, but no, this is just us. This is our world. We just got to see it differently. So succulents are a really prime subject for this. Not every succulent will work, but they're more likely to fluoresce than other flowers. That's a South African version. Same with this one here. But there are so many flowers that, my wife's favorite flower, I mentioned earlier, beginning of the presentation, was a snowdrop. And so what if I take this snowdrop flower, I plucked it, brought it into the studio, and throw it in that ultraviolet light scenario? It is electrified. in a word. Like you've got these blue electric lines running down the flower petals, and I just love the look of this thing. And so flowers can do some really not every flower does, by the way. You'll get skunked a lot of times. Just got to keep trying. And I'll walk around the garden with my ultraviolet light at night and just see what might be glowing a little bit and see what happens from that. And so yeah, Stephen says it's clear in some differentiation going on that the leaves giving rise to two different colors. And as flowers age, as the petals or the leaves age, their fluorescent properties will also change as well. And so in certain cases too, we've got insects that might do the same. Now this ugly little girl, this dog day cicada, female, I think I looked up the markings to say that. I just about stepped on my driveway and was going to pick up and move off to the side. But I picked her up and she just kind of hung out in my hand. And I thought, okay, moment of opportunity here. Let's take that into my studio. Not telling my wife. And so now I've got this gigantic bug in my studio on it's a filter. I think it's a 900 nanometer infrared filter, but it had a reflective coating on it. So I was just using it as a mirror. Turned off the room lights and turned on the ultraviolet flashes, and beast becomes beauty in a way that I couldn't have predicted. This was one of those moments where I mean, I'm giddy with excitement, but I'm like, I've just won the lottery, because how the hell do those clear wings turn a science fiction shade of blue? And notice this little nodule here that's not clear, but it's this dark green color. That turns a brighter color of blue, but the wings that were clear turned blue, and the eyes that were black also turned blue. And this was cool. This was neat. I had fun with that. And I've tried other subjects. Some dragonflies do it. Most don't. I tried this bee. Steve and I have talked about this bee before, my beautiful lady in green, as we talked about on an episode of his podcast, Behind the Shot, before. Steve,
Yeah,
you remember that chat?
This is one of the most popular episodes I've done, was this shot.
And this was this iridescent green sweat bee in a cornflower just on the side of my house. It's beautiful, and I love it. But what if I can do it in ultraviolet? And we had a cold morning where the bees were grounded. And so I brought everything outside, in situ outside, and I set this up. And I got this shot. Same bee, well, same species of bee and the same species of flower. And it's an entirely different thing. Here was the setup, by the way. Those flashes, again, using the flashes with a live critter that's going to move around, because with the minerals or the other flowers, my exposure time might be into the seconds. So the instantaneous light from these flashes could be helpful. And draped over by black felt. And yeah, it's in my own garden. I don't mind plucking some petals off of the flower to get a better director view into the scene. But that bee is still asleep. And how do I wake him up? Well, I breathe on him. I'm a warm-blooded creature. He is not. So I can just waft some warm air in his general direction. And he started waking up and crawling around, and that's how I got the shot. So, low tech is where this stuff comes to. Or sometimes it's just what's on your desk. Like I've got those ultraviolet flashlights, and you can see that here at play. And I've got the flower that's kind of, some flower petals are bending down. Right underneath those petals is a little dab of highlighter ink. And the highlighter ink fluoresces like crazy. I mean, that's why it's highlighting. So that turned into this. in terms of this beautiful, like almost like lava / fire pit of glowiness in this flower, with the petals starting to bend down around it. And I was so excited with this image. I took it to the computer where I am right now, and I was editing it, and I went back afterwards, and I turned off the lights in the scene, but I had to clean up my mess now. And this is that reiteration of the concept of, you might want to wear glasses, safety glasses, if you don't wear protective eyewear. Because this flower was bleached by the amount of light, the ultraviolet light that was hitting it, and it killed certain sections. That's why those petals were bending down, is they were dying as I was shooting it. So I do it on occasion. I probably should do it every time, but I will wear the ultraviolet protective glasses. And here I am wearing them in what's probably the geekiest selfie that you may have seen. So those are clear glasses that I'm wearing, but they appear black, opaque, because I'm shooting this in ultraviolet reflectance. This is the ultraviolet light that's reflecting off of me. And so I'm going all like nerdy Terminator style here. I just had to put on the leather jacket. That was a requirement. And I had to put the bellows lens from the 1970s on the camera because it looked a little bit more like a weapon. And that's me. That's me in a nutshell there, wearing my safety glasses. So we'll move on because it's awkward. This is another succulent. This is an Ornithogalum dubium, also called a Star of Bethlehem flower. And it just had this beautiful pastel orange color. And I adjust the white balance based on what the subject is, but they all kind of have a central point of what they're going to create. And you want to find that balance where everything is, you got the greens and the yellows and reds and oranges all properly depicted here. I'm going to throw this image up. I'm going to ask the audience again. Troy was pretty close on the other one. He had guessed cucumber when it was a zucchini. I wonder if anybody can guess what this flower
just
is
to
from.
interrupt. Cucumber is not zucchini, so Troy was wrong. Sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
Fair enough. Any guesses as to what this flower, what plant this flower is from? Gives me an excuse to drink my beer. Couple of guesses here. Arugula, succulent. Mark says should know this. Well, if you know it, just guess.
Arugula seems very specific, Annette. It's almost like Annette knows what this is.
Well.
She grows it.
Well, okay. So you might see something similar, but that's not it at all. In fact, this is a flower from a tree. And it is a tree that you know what, I'm gonna give you guys all a pass on this because it's an East Coast tree, not a West Coast tree. This is the flower from a maple tree. I didn't even know that maple trees had flowers. And I've been living here for the longest time. They have this light green blush to them in the early spring. And I just thought it was the buds starting to open. No, it was the flowers. And they smell like maple syrup. You can even eat them. It's amazing what you can do with maple trees. And these look like alien donuts. But no, that is a maple flower. So there you go. And yeah, and that was closer than Troy was. Troy, you're way off. Maple is nowhere near a succulent, but hey, thank you for playing. And Steve, you really can't be jabbing anybody because you haven't been guessing either. So there you are.
Because I don't do plants.
You know,
I just tell my gardener I don't want any plants that actually grow.
So like lawn that gets shaved down a half an inch above the ground. That's okay. I get you. And Mark says, what maple variety? I believe it's a silver maple in my front yard, but I haven't done genomic testing to tell you for sure. So there you go. Here's another fun example. This is a passion flower, which they don't typically grow in our area, but you can buy them as potted plants. And as colorful as it is, and again, substitute those flashes for flashlights. It would have been perfectly the same in this example. But turn off the room lights, turn on those lights, and there you go. That is your end result. It's a floral carousel of color. I don't know how else to describe it, but it is far more colorful in fluorescence than it is in regular light. But here's a trick that I did, and this might throw you guys through a bit of a loop, but you'll see the camera here. It's kind of hard to see on the bottom of the frame, but it's on a focusing rail. But the focusing rail is mounted horizontally around the edge here. So the camera is not going to move forward and backward through the subject for focusing. It's going to move left and right. And I'm going to see if anybody can get this to work, because if you take an image in one position, then move it left or right from that same position, you can get a stereoscopic 3D image pair. And I've set this up in a way that is inverted, so that the left image is on the right side and the right image is on the left side, which requires you to cross your eyes to see. If you see one image and you cross your eyes, you'll see double vision. But if you see two and you cross your eyes, you will see in the middle. If you can focus on the one that forms in the middle, so that there's three of them and you're focusing on the one in the middle, you will see this jump out in three-dimensional depth. And okay, so at least Rick got it to work. About 50% of people can never get it to work. And the other 50% that can sometimes takes a bit of effort to have it lock in, and you don't get to see it on the first try. And Mark says, get it on your headset. You'd need it inverted. If you have something like as I have here, like a Google Cardboard, and I can send it to you. Just send me an email. I'll send you the version of it in the side-by-side, which is just a flipped way, so you don't have to cross your eyes to see it. Then I can get you a version that would look fine on something like that. But isn't that cool? For those of you that could get it anyhow, that to see this type of thing to work. And here's one more bonus round on that idea. This is a freezing soap bubble in the center of a flower that, using exactly the same technique, you'll be able to see in 3 dimensions. And Bruce, your eyes will never get stuck doing this. I've looked it up. I've found scientific research that proved against that fact. And kid, I'm sorry that you only have one working eyeball. You can't see it in 3D. You're missing out on this. But just kind of block half of it off, and you'll at least see it in interesting 2D. But that 3-dimensional element of this stuff, I find really valuable from the perspective of exploring things in a way that normally we can't see, right? And yeah, I'm happy that I've got vision at all. I mean, I've always imagined what people that don't have eyesight at all perceive the world as, and while it's a different experience, I wouldn't want to experience that myself. But it's fun. I had fun with this kind of imagery, and I'm glad that at least some of you guys got this to work. Back to normal photography, boring, regular light 2D imagery, which really is unimpressive for the most part. This succulent had nectar in the center of the flowers. I guess it's supposed to attract insects and bugs that would feast and spread the pollen around. It was an indoor plant, so nothing was really attracted to it. If I turn off the room lights, turn on the ultraviolet lights, then that succulent just sings. And you can even see pollen floating around in the nectar in those flowers. I just found that to be a really fun added element to an image like this. And you can mix flowers and insects together as well. Fair warning, if anybody is arachnophobic, there's 2 images coming up that have spiders in them. So you might want to just close your eyes, because here's the first one. You've got a crab spider that is very fluorescently turquoise on a bee balm flower that almost looks like he's conducting an orchestra, because those flowers look like pipe organs to me. And this image, I actually, when I look at it, I hear in my mind to create this as an image. And so that was kind of a fun exploration of that. And the next one, a daring jumping spider, which was the hardest thing to image because the spiders are non-cooperative subjects. They're not going to take direction. I'm actually snapping my fingers off the side of the frame that is getting the spider's attention. And and so Troy asked, so is the UV harmful to the insects? Not really. I mean, is UV harmful to your eyes spending the whole day outside in the sun? Well, I mean, possibly. It's harmful. You might get a sunburn. I'm using flash with this, which is so instantaneous and non-continuous that it's not harmful to the bugs. Not any more so than being outside in nature would be to them anyhow. So, but that is a good question to keep in mind, that I'm not harming anything in this process. I am manipulating them. I've taken that spider into my studio, but some people keep them as pets. And so I haven't gone quite that far.
With the flashlights that you were using, would that be harmful to a spider sitting there for a few minutes?
The flashlights, possibly, because it's so intense, just like that flower got bleached. But the spider would not sit still for a few minutes. It wouldn't sit still for a few seconds. So you wouldn't get any image, and you'd be constantly chasing that spider around with that flashlight, and you get nothing out of that. So except maybe you'd hurt the spider. And so don't do that. But this, I was lucky enough when we bought this house that we have here to have a stand of yellow lady slipper orchids. And they're a beautiful flower, but I mean, they're only so beautiful, right? Yeah, it's not the greatest image, but it's this version of it under the ultraviolet fluorescence just kind of, I don't know. It's like Avatar, or what was that animated movie with the little fairy, Fern Gully. It almost feels like something from Fern Gully to see something like this. So there you go. And here's another experiment. So we have a little blob here. This is actually a mineral sample. It's a faceted crystal of cerussite. And cerussite is a lead ore variety that, if you get it from the right location, will fluoresce into about the same color as the sun. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of neat. Let's have the camera in the foreground here. You can see it right in the front of the frame. And I've got ultraviolet flashes, again, with the subject, substitute flashlights, make it cheap, and it's fine. And I've got some Irish moss flowers that are positioned on by these little helping hand tools around the outer edge. And they're all kind of positioned like they're growing in towards the flower. And I believe it's Spanish moss on the bottom. But I wanted to create this idea of flowers. You know how they move through the night, or the day sky, kind of chasing the sun around. But what if it's night? And what if there was another light source? And what if that light source is this mineral, and all the flowers are growing in towards it? And that would be this as a resulting story, as a resulting narrative. And heliotropism, yes, that's the word, Stephen. As they chase the sun, but here they are chasing an imaginary sun, a surrogate to the sun. They are all gathering around the campfire of light that is this fluorescing crystal. Now, this doesn't exist in nature. This goes back to that idea of us having a hand in creating our artwork and understanding the physics and the science of how different things come together. and then creating art as a result, that has its own narrative, that has its own story. And that's really what I've been kind of going on here today, is this storytelling element. And you can weave that art and science together. And the deeper you weave it, I think the more magical that becomes. And that is that trip down the rabbit hole. Now, I do have a bonus round, by the way. We do have a few extra images here, but I might want to possibly open it up to any questions that have been maybe sitting on the back burner from anybody curious about things that have been talked about. The reason why I have the next section on the bonus round is because if you're all in California, you might have to like befriend somebody with a sub-zero meat freezer to handle what happens next. And it's only about a dozen images, but it does reconnect this whole puzzle piece approach of photography. So what do we got? Are there any questions that I missed, folks, through the way? I'm not sure what
there is a question from Annette asking what kind of flashlights were they that you can use instead of flash?
That is the Convoy S2 is my favorite. And there's a guy that sells them based out of New Jersey, I believe. And he owns a website called Midnight Minerals. He actually took a course with me on macro photography in 2020 after I bought a bunch of flashlights that we sent out to a bunch of our students from him. And so he was a great guy, and he's a local source for them within the United States. So if you want to check that out, I'm sure you plug both those phrases into Google, you'll find them pretty easily.
Any other questions from anybody?
If we're wrapping down, Don, and we can actually unmute everybody. So if anybody wants to chime in vocally, unless you have a little.
Well, let me do my encore, which will only be about another 5 minutes or so.
Let's
and
do
then
that.
We can unmute everybody if that's the case, because that encore is another subject of freezing soap bubbles, which again, not really a California subject, but it is kind of magical to see the results that one can create by just guiding light in the right way. You've got this flashlight. Okay, it's a big beefy flashlight. You carry that on, and it hits through this. You can kind of see it right here. It's a sheet, piece of plastic. It's called a Fresnel lens, often mispronounced as a Fresnel lens because it's French, and the French add all sorts of extra letters into words that aren't needed. But it's also called a sheet magnifier. Just plug that into Amazon. I'm sure you'd find sheet magnifiers of a variety of different sizes, which takes the conical beam of the flashlight and inverts it back down to a tiny little spotlight, which you see on this back side here, which is that freezing soap bubble. And if I was using that bright light, I can even do this in open shade if it's cold enough. And if I expose properly for that bubble, then I get this. And of course, this wouldn't be my frame. I would be cropping in towards that bubble itself, but I'm just showing you the surroundings as to how everything kind of comes together. And I can go into the extremes in terms of magnification and get something that looks like this. Now, the color, by the way, comes from that cheap sheet magnifier, that Fresnel lens. It's basically a molded piece of plastic that does a very poor job of bending light. And so white light actually bends off course a little bit and kind of gives you a bit of a rainbow effect, which actually adds some dimension to some of the images. And so I've done a whole series of work with these freezing soap bubbles. And yeah, after a while, okay, freezing soap bubble on snow, it's great. Another freezing soap bubble on snow, it's also great, but still kind of the same thing. So I thought, well, what if we change it up a little bit? What if I put quartz crystal, right? Leave a piece of quartz crystal outside to acclimate to the outside temperature. And then you've got crystal sort of begetting crystal, right? Crystal born of crystal. That was kind of a neat idea. But people were looking at these images and thinking, wouldn't that be great to have as a little bauble on my Christmas tree? Well, I can do that. I can make it a Christmas ornament. I can just take a branch of my Christmas tree, take that outside into the freezing cold, and there you go. There's your freezing soap bubble on a branch of my Christmas tree. But you don't have to be season specific with this. I can go to the florist, even right now here in early February, and grab some Gerber daisies and just leave the flower outside for an hour. It'll turn to solid ice, and then just place a freezing soap bubble on top. It's lit from the back with one flashlight to illuminate the crystal structure, and underneath with another to illuminate part of the underside of the flower. And I've done that technique a number of times. In fact, I showed you a 3D version of this image earlier, which I thought was a lot of fun. But this brought me back to that whole what if moment and that whole puzzle piece approach. You know, I can figure out how to photograph flowers and water droplet refractions. I can figure out how to photograph freezing soap bubbles. I can figure out how to photograph ultraviolet fluorescence. But what if I try to mash some of that together? And in this case, I built a concoction here of ultraviolet fluorescing pigment, which, I mean, they sell it for novelty makeup that would be like running through, you know, I don't know, Halloween time. You might have some makeup artists that use it to make people fluoresce under ultraviolet light. And I bought a big jug of ultraviolet fluorescing bubble fluid that I guess they sell it for nightclubs or raves or something. It's not exactly a common thing, but you can buy it. I tried to combine those things together. And by the way, a nondescript bag of white powder arrives perfectly fine through the postal system here. I have no idea how that happened. But anyhow, so I make that mixture and I realize I've got multiple points of failure. You know, my light source, this was one of my first ultraviolet flashes. It had a red light leak. I realized I needed an extra filter to remove that. But also the pigment was not soluble in whatever that bubble fluid was made of. I'm assuming water, but I'm not sure. So I went back to the drawing board and I found invisible ink designed for fountain pens. Because, I mean, number one, who uses fountain pens today? Of course, I've got at least 3 of them on my desk. Yeah, well, there you go, Troy. Yeah, I can hold one up too. Yeah, they're not that hard to find. Are we holding up the same pen, Troy? Is that a Lamy Studio?
Yeah, we are holding up the same pen. Yeah.
My God, that's terrifyingly awkward. Okay, so you can get ink for fountain pens that fluoresces under ultraviolet light, and at that point, I realized, well, mix some of that into the water, and it's water soluble. And then I made this bubble mixture. And then I went out into to my backyard again with this new revised formula. Months later, after the drawing board stuff and the research takes some time, and then I created this, which is a freezing soap bubble that is glowing as its own light source. Because the ultraviolet light that is coming from the flash is not detected from the camera. The only thing the camera can see is visible light, which is created in the subject itself. So it really is its own light source. And I called this one Frost Lantern. And that furtherance
It's
down
amazing
the
how
rabbit hole.
It's amazing how 3D that bubble is.
Yeah, it looks like an alien egg hatching or something.
Yeah.
So that was I need to do this one in 3D, Steve. I haven't done that yet.
Well, you need to 3D print
but
it.
Can you do a bubble inside of a bubble?
Yes, with a hypodermic needle. I have not done that yet either, but I can if I don't like to go out into the cold, Troy.
That's why I live in Southern California.
Yeah.
Because
it was 66 and sunny today.
I'm thinking about, like, I would be like the kid in the Christmas Story trying to go out in the snow, and I can't reach my camera because I'm all bundled up.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. That's where it all goes. So, That is the universe at our feet, as we talked about. And again, my video has gone like super bright. I've been illuminated. Let's fix that.
I'm going to go ahead and
Future's
unmute
so bright,
everybody
I gotta wear
so
UV
that
shades.
I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so that if you choose to, we can give Don an audible clap because he deserves he deserves that. So everybody can go ahead and unmute yourself if you like. So, and if you have any questions, no, you can't. Well, I said unmute. All participants are allowed to unmute themselves.
I am
good now.
myself.
There we go.
Yay!
All I would like to say is Don, it's a good thing you and I are not neighbors.
And why is that?
Because we'd have two crazy scientific brains doing all sorts of weird shit. So.
Yeah, when I think about the kind of work that I do, Stephen, it's like, okay, I've got a bag of micrometeorites sitting waiting for me to shoot in my studio, and I'm going to see if any of them fluoresce. And if they do, I'm going to take a photograph of a fluorescing micrometeorite the likes of the world has never seen before, because it's literally never been done before. I remember somebody telling me early on, maybe multiple people, maybe it was just the atmosphere of the idea that, in photography, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's been done before. You're just walking in other people's footsteps on the shoulders of giants, et cetera. And yeah, you know what? I'm not the first person to go down this path. But you can go further than other people. And there's always something new to explore, so long as you go far enough and you explore a niche as much as I have. When I sit in my studio and I think to myself, I don't think anybody else has ever seen this before, or at least ever photographed it in a way that I'm about to do, I just get excited. And then I fail, and then the image is just a complete piece of garbage. But I still created a complete piece of garbage that nobody else has created before, and so I'm still happy.
Most of science, as you know, Don, is failed experiments, right? That's how we learn. But exactly. I'm just thinking about, like, could you and I inject DNA into a soap bubble and then add some ethidium bromide and then photograph the fluorescence of a freezing soap bubble with, DNA fluorescing with ethidium bromide and stuff like that. So
even simpler, Stephen, just take a flower, mix up a pot of fluorescein with flower food, and make a flower glow green.
Cool. I'll try it.
And anybody can do that. You can get all those ingredients at your corner store just about, or at least on Amazon.
Don,
anybody else have go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? I think really the thing that, from an experimental perspective, anything that's been done in 2D has not probably been done yet in 3D. And that's one of the areas of great experimental opportunities really lie, I think, because there's a shitload of stuff that we could be doing. And that's why those examples of doing, parallax shooting. I mean, it's just the problem, like, when people say 3D, they really don't understand what 3D really is half the time. They really don't.
Like, you have to compose in 3 dimensions. You can't just take a 2D image and say, okay, well, let's make it 3-dimensional. Because if you do that, it's gimmicky and it wears off very quickly. But to make a proper 3D composition, you have to be thinking in Z depth, or as I would say, Z depth.
Yeah.
But
Mark would say it that way too.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
Well, thank you.
By the way, the other thing I was going to say with that staccato that you shot for Craig and I don't know if Craig is still in the room or not. We get a lot of staccatos down here in Australia, a hell of a lot, to the point where it's deafening. So we have the opportunity, but I'd be really curious to see what those would look like here, because they have such a huge variety. Whereas I know the Canadian ones, there's a few, not as many as we get here. And that was,
we don't have the
Craig
dog
did have to
cicadas.
leave, just so that you know.
yeah.
Okay. The dog day cicadas that I photographed, they're a yearly brood. It's not the 17-year cycle of different varieties, which they might have here, but I just haven't encountered personally. So I want to actually, as part of just a scientific experiment, go on to eBay or Amazon or wherever I can buy some bug specimens and buy just a dozen different species of dragonflies and cicadas and other big-winged insects and see if any of them properly fluoresce, or better yet, contact a museum that has an entomology department and just kind of take my flashlights and just kind of peer over everything and say, aha, what's that? I'm going to get my own of whatever that is.
I shipped them to you, but I just don't know if they get over the border crossings.
Yeah, shipping a random exotic organic matter across the border right now.
Just
not a good
they're
idea.
food.
Yeah,
Right. You can eat cicadas. Just ship them as food. I mean, look, I got a bag of lollies that I opened during the show, by the way, so I was able to enjoy some of those.
Put a few cicadas in the lollies, right?
Yeah, then you're smuggling. Yeah,
Yeah, that's that's not gonna end
Not
well.
something anybody should do. Let's just be clear.
Yeah.
What you want to do is just
Totally.
take them, set them on the ground, and point them in the right direction. Let them walk.
It's right.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well,
So,
Don,
just one
gonna-
quick question. Just
Sure,
one-
sure, yeah.
Yeah, go, Stephen.
Yeah, have you published your protocol for your frozen soap bubble shots yet, or no?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've illustrated that. There's an episode of DPReview TV that I
Okay.
had done a while back, showing the entire sort of process, beginning to end.
Right.
And there's a recipe to it, but it's one that I've published previously as well. And there's temperature constraints. You're probably best between -8 and -20 Celsius. That's what 14 Fahrenheit and colder.
I work in Celsius anyway, so it's cool.
Okay,
So.
but in that neighborhood, which is what we're at like right now, if you have absolutely no wind outside, or you can block the wind in some way, then those freezing soap bubbles become very easy. The real trick with that is that you have to add a small contingent of white corn syrup, or in certain parts of the world, it's glucose syrup, which is basically sugar, liquid sugar, into the formula, so that it pools at the bottom of the bubble, so that when I blow it through a drinking straw, I can choose kind of the diameter roughly when I do it that way and place it where I want it to go. But in the time that it takes for me to blow the bubble and place the bubble, the glucose syrup will pool at the bottom of the bubble and act as a cushion that stops it from popping on impact. And that sometimes, anyhow, without it, it's like winning the lottery to make it stay intact. But with it, it's a 50-50 chance, which is much better.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. We're coming to the end of our time. So, everybody, make sure that you check out Don's website at donkom, donkom.ca. There's lots of really good information there. And of course, if you just look up, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as if you look up like frozen soap bubbles, UV luminescent flowers, or bugs, Don's there.
Find me.
Don.
Well, and the other thing I would add is make sure that you go check out DPReview TV on YouTube, because Don's doing a lot of different shows on them, and some of them are crazy, like mad scientist stuff, where he's, putting
you
his
should
life
check
in...
out that diffraction video that I just did.
Yes.
Because I had some physicists chime in and say, well, I watched this and I approve. And other photographers that were a little bit too high on their soapbox started chiming in and giving me equations that said that I'm wrong and so on and so forth. I'm like, okay, well, you might be right, but so am I practically. So it doesn't really matter. But to understand some of those concepts is what I'm trying to figure out with that video series. And if you subscribe, and I maybe do this as a favor to me, because they pay me to make those videos. And the more people that subscribe based on watching my video and then subscribing makes me look really good, and makes them makes them want to make me make more videos, or at least to pay me, or whatever that works out to. So
Can we get the URL for that, just so that we can just go right there?
Yeah, there is one.
If you do, I'll pull it up and I'll put it in the chat. Just give me 2 seconds.
You're the man, Steve.
There you go. Yeah, there's a separate subgroup of, I think I've done not quite a dozen videos in this particular series with DPReview TV, but they will be going on. And I was going to film one today on focus stacking, but the world got the better of me, as it does some days. And well, hey, we're in wonderful pandemic times, and it's frustrating. But yeah.
Well,
very true.
Thank you, everybody. Steve, if you don't get that link in the chat, well, we can always put that in on the YouTube description too, so everybody has it for everybody in the future. Because once it's in the chat, it doesn't last.
Oh, there you go.
So.
There's the DP review. But if you go to the particular, I don't know what they call it, but the different streams or channels or
playlists,
what have you, playlists. That's the word. You'll find one of me there.
Hold on, I'll put that one in there. Just give me 2 seconds.
Rock and roll.
Got it.
1. Well, okay. 2.5 seconds. Oh my God, they have a million playlists.
I know. There's.
Do you know what playlist
I'm the mad
it is,
scientist. Don? It's the mad scientist playlist. It shouldn't be too hard to find. It's right near the top. At least it is on my list. Maybe it's biased.
Oh, mad scientist with Don Komarechka. Gotcha. Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Let me copy.
Cool. Well, Don, Steve, Troy, coming from me, that was a very wonderful, informative evening, and thank you very much for coming on, and Steve and Troy for making this happen.
You got it. And hey, guys, for those of you who are still hanging out, next month, Steve and I are going to have on Darren McBurnett, who is doing a program called Uncommon Grit. It's a photographic journey.
Yeah.
Through,
so if you look on the
Navy
shelf
SEAL
behind
training.
me, he was on my podcast. That's how I found out about him.
See it.
The book behind me on the shelf, Uncommon Grit. They talk about SEAL training, and now and then you'll see a little bit of behind the scenes where, you know, they'll show somebody ringing a bell because they want out. Darren was a 24-year Navy SEAL and was allowed to take pictures through all the training. And the stuff in this book is insanely good. So I'm super excited for that one.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Don, Steve, everybody for coming in and spending your evening with us. We appreciate it. I know it's later for some of you than it is for others, so I appreciate everybody hanging out. So again, thank you, Don. Send me that package, and we'll get some pieces made for you. So
all right. Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it.
Everybody, thanks for joining us.
Yep. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good one.